So it's my pleasure to introduce SB Morgaine, who is the Program Manager for Interpreting and Transliteration at the Northern Virginia Resource Center for Deaf and Hard of Hearing Persons. It's a long, long title. She was raised in Eastern Washington State as an evangelical Christian, went through an exorcism at 14, was preaching at church regularly at 18, and was an atheist by 25. Nice path there. My favorite memory, I think, is epitomized by one image from the Reason Rally. SB was the interpreter at the Reason Rally. If you were there, I don't know if you've heard of it.
Yay!
And there's one particular image taken by Bruce Press during one of Tim Minchin's more vulgar and inappropriate songs. SB cheerfully brandishing middle fingers, and Dave Silverman, Adam Savage, and people backstage just cracking up. That sort of epitomizes the moment to me. And she's here to talk about making the group more accessible. So, welcome her.
All right. Hi. So, just about the exorcism, I was the largest carrier of demons in the Tri-City, Washington area in 1988. I had friends that made me business cards that I used to hand out to people. Anyhow, this is what you usually think of when you think about interpreters. At least this is sort of what happens for us. And what I want to talk about today is not only making your group accessible for the deaf and hard of hearing, but what you can do easily, cheaply, with really not much effort at all to make your groups more accessible to the disabled in general. One of the things that I've noticed here today is that we have very, very few people with disabilities wandering around, at least very few that are self-identified with disabilities that I've seen. And I think that's something that we need to really work on as a overarching theme, because churches have many, many programs for people with disabilities. There are deaf churches, there are churches for the blind, there are churches who give you free hearing aids, there are churches that will give you Braille Bibles, there are churches that will do everything and help you out, and very rarely do we get involved with people with disabilities. So I'm here to change that. 1 in 5 people has a disability. So in this room, we've got, 30, 20, 10 people? I don't know how many people there are. But there's probably somebody here who has one, whether you see it or not. I personally have mental illness. It's my favorite disability. I also have some problems with my body in general. So I'm classified as disabled, but would you ever think it if you saw me walking by? Unless you're one of those people that thinks that being fat's a disability, which I call yes. Okay, sorry. So 1 in 5 people has a disability, which is why it's important to us. Watching your language. These are just going to be little tips that you can do for your groups. The first one is watch your language. And the reason that I say that is not to censor yourself, not to be rude, not to say whatever. But how many times do you say, religious people are crazy? How many times have we said that? Many, many times. As a crazy person, I take offense to that. I'm not religious, and therefore you are saying that I am the same as the religious people. It's just those kind of things that when you're using words like insane or crazy or retarded or any of those, you just have to think about who in the room might that be affecting. Who in the room has a child who has Down syndrome, and you say religious people are retarded, and you're talking about their child. And I know you've all seen the PSAs, their silliness, but just kind of try to remember that sometimes when you are encouraging people with disabilities. That's the best way to stop people from coming. When someone with a disability presents themselves to your group, like for example, on the registration form for this very conference, it said, do you need a sign language interpreter? That's awesome. Wonderful, a wonderful step. But what if you're deaf and don't use sign? What if you need CART? What if you were raised oral? I know that these are all things that maybe you aren't aware of, but there are different kinds of language modalities for deaf people. So when you say specifically, do you need a sign language interpreter, you're assuming that that person will use that modality. What's better to say is, do you need an accommodation? That's something you can put on your flyers when you are encouraging people to come to events. Accommodations provided upon request. One little line, and suddenly people with disabilities know that you are willing to work with them to make sure that they have access to that information as well. It's very simple, but it's something that's really, really important. When the person shows up at an event, don't assume, oh my God, they have crutches, we need to go help them carry things. That's not necessarily true. It's always best to ask the person just straightforwardly, do you need some help? No? Cool. One of the things that you'll find in the disabled community is that if you, that people don't necessarily want your help. It's, I am in a wheelchair, I can grab this thing for myself, and the fact that you have decided that I can't grab it makes me an infant, and that's very disheartening sometimes. Okay, this is my favorite one. Don't be feared. People with disabilities get a lot of very interesting responses to their disability. And one of the biggest one is people being afraid to say something. Being afraid to say, hey, how'd you get in the chair? Some people, I mean, granted, people with disabilities are not always the same, but if you say to someone, I noticed you're in a wheelchair, they are aware they're in a wheelchair. And so that usually is something that if you ask people with disabilities, they would rather that you asked them. They would rather that you didn't just go, oh my God, I don't know, oh my God, okay. You know, like, just don't be afraid. Just go up and talk to them. Like, it's amazing how isolating having a disability can be. People, using the deaf community, since that's sort of where I do most of my work, imagine for just 1 second that I was speaking German right now, and that all of the conference material was in German, and you've taken German in school, but that's not your language. So you have to bring an interpreter with you to the conference because you don't speak German. So now everything that you're doing is through this interpreter, and you don't really have access to what's going on, and then people are afraid to talk to you because you've got an interpreter. So they walk up and they go, it happens all the time. And as an interpreter, I stand there like this. It's okay, you can come and talk. No, it's okay, come talk. It's okay, never mind. Like, you just have to not be afraid. People who have differences, whatever they are willing to be in it with you. And they will explain and they will tell you if you offend them. That's usually the best thing to remember. Okay. Most of you are from colleges. I don't know what it is called at your college, but the Disability Resource Center. If you need an interpreter, or if you have a deaf person on campus that has expressed interest in coming to your events, interpreters are expensive, but ask your DRC or the whatever Disability Student Center, Disability Students Office, whatever, ask them what is provided. Often interpreters are provided by the college for events. Often they will provide assistance for people who are blind who need assistance into events. There are all sorts of amazing things that you can do through your Disability Resource Center. Another thing that you can do is ask your Disability Resource Center for a tour of your campus from the disability perspective. That is huge. If you can go out with someone who, like, and usually it's someone who is mobility challenged in a wheelchair with crutches or whatever, but if you ask them for a tour of your campus, a rolling tour is what they're called sometimes, and they can show you, like, how difficult would it be for someone in a wheelchair to get into this room, or to get up to lunch today, or to get, you know, there are all of these things, and the Disability Resource Center on your campus will by far be the best place to get information. So, interpreters. We're great people, but most of us are religious. Most interpreters come from a religious background because it's such a blessing to work with those poor disableds. And so you've got to make sure that if you request interpreters, that you specifically say that you are a secular organization, that you specifically request an interpreter that is not afraid of secularism. Because they'll put that out when they request the interpreters. They'll ask the interpreters if they're okay with it. Because there will be nothing more awkward than the interpreter standing next to me the whole time going, "You're gonna burn in hell. You're gonna burn in hell." Because in some places, it's okay to, well, not in some places, in some people's crazy minds, see, I just did it, It's okay to proselytize during work. It's not, but they do it. And because they're looking at the poor deaf person as the poor deaf person who needs their help, so the interpreters have a tendency to be a little preachy. That's the sign for preachy. A little ASL. Also, interpreters are expensive. Very nice. You kind of look like a gay preacher, David. I'm sorry. But interpreters are spendy. It's expensive to hire interpreters, absolutely. And let me tell you, worth every single penny. Again, going back to German, if you're trying to figure out what someone is saying because you have an interpreter that took 2 years of high school German and is now trying to explain the in-depth policies of secularism, you're not going to get a good explanation. You're not going to get a good interpretation. So while it is spendy and seems like, we don't really have the money to do this, try to find it. There are places in almost every city that has a deaf population. There are organizations like perhaps the Northern Virginia Resource Center for Deaf and Hard of Hearing Persons. I don't know why they put the persons on the end of it. We provide lower cost interpreters for organizations that can't afford to pay for the interpreters at the crazy 200 and something an hour that some interpreters charge. So find those organizations. If you are at a school that has an ASL program, you can find interns. Find good interpreters. It's worthwhile. Okay. Is your website accessible? Are your videos captioned? It is super simple to caption your videos. There are many, many places that you can do it. YouTube does it pretty well. The Secular Students Alliance, I will have to say, rock on. Almost every single video on there was captioned. Right on. I was very impressed. That does not happen very often. And also, is your website accessible to the blind? If you don't know, blind people use screen readers. And if you don't set up your website so that the screen reader can read it, it's completely garbage. And so blind people go to the website, click, not available for screen reader. Okay, these people don't care, and away they go. So it's just an idea that you can find ways to do it. You can find free screen readers and run them across your website yourself. These things don't have to be spendy. Is your room where you have your meetings accessible? Is it accessible for people in wheelchairs? Is it accessible for people who are blind? How cramped of a room is it? If there's crap everywhere, that's not accessible for someone who is blind because it's very easy to trip. Is it accessible for people who are deaf? Is there rows like this, or is there a circular table? Circular tables are great because deaf people can see what you're talking about and they feel more involved in the action. And this sort of thing, they're staring at an interpreter and that's all. Is your room accessible? Does somebody have to climb stairs? The college I went to, one of the groups that I was involved with always met on the 3rd floor of a building that didn't have an elevator. As a person who has problems with their hips, I never went to those meetings because I couldn't get to them. So it isn't just the people with the obvious disabilities, it's also people who have hidden disabilities that may not want to come to you and be like, yes, so I can't walk up 3 flights of stairs. So it's just an idea. Always be accessible. And this one, I have 8 minutes left, so we'll have time for questions. I talk too freaking fast. Is your group welcoming? That is a huge one. If somebody with a disability shows up, are you friendly? Do you talk to them? Do you include them in the conversation? Blind people kind of get put in the corner often, and are you okay? Awesome. All right, we'll go away and we'll do things, and they have no idea what's going on. Deaf people, the same thing. They get stuck with their interpreter, and then it's them and their interpreter chatting, and nobody ever comes and talks to them. People in wheelchairs just feel isolated because nobody ever gets to their level. It's amazing when you're talking to somebody in a wheelchair, if you do this, how much more accessible you now are to that person because your eyes are in my eyes. How much would it suck to have to look at people's crotches every day, all day long? Like you're having conversations with people's penises. Nobody wants to do that. So just try to be welcoming. Just try to remember to be there. And I did have one more. I knew I did. So this is one, if you were sitting with me at lunch, you probably already heard, but if not, too bad. Wheelchair rules. Don't ride on people's wheelchairs. I know that it seems like something silly. Don't put things in people's lap who are in a wheelchair. Don't ride on their wheelchair. Don't pop wheelies with their wheelchairs. See, now you all are looking at me like, oh, you're kidding. Nobody ever does that. I cannot tell you how many times I've watched people just walk up and jump on the back of somebody's wheelchair. Or just throw stuff in their lap. Oh, you don't mind holding this? Dunk. It's very simple just to think about the fact that this person is, their wheelchair is part of their person. So you should be nice and treat their wheelchair as though it's part of their person. It's very simple. In 14 minutes, I've covered pretty much really good ideas. Oh, except for disabled people know they're disabled. I already said that. But they know they're disabled, and there's nothing that you are going to tell them about themselves that they don't already know. Wow, brain fart. Did you watch that? I'm sweating my words out. It's really this is a very simple, very kind of glib, very quick talk that we're doing here. But the biggest thing is just to remember disabled people are people. And to bring them in, and don't expect them to just talk about their disability. That's one thing that we were talking about at lunch, is that there are, I'm sure, hundreds of disabled atheists who have something to say. It would be great if they were on stage talking right now instead of me. If we can bring people into the organizations, into our groups, into the student centers. There's so many disabled people on campuses, and very often they feel very isolated and left out. Reach out to them. Reach out to the Disabled Service Center and say, the Secular Students Alliance wants to do a volunteer project or wants to do a community project with the Disability Resource Center. Can you help us out? What can we do? What can we do to help? What can we do? It doesn't have to be expensive. It can just be, it's just basically opening your mind. So, 4 minutes. Question? Yes, Mr. Silverman? Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.